Abandoned in enemy territory. First document. Sarah Martinez gripped the steering wheel of the military jeep as explosions echoed through the desert mountains. The communication radio crackled with urgent voices before falling into deadly silence. She was the intelligence officer attached to a special reconnaissance unit operating near the Pakistani-Afghan border in 2019. The mission had started like any other routine intelligence-gathering operation. Sarah and her team of 6 soldiers were tasked with monitoring enemy movements in a remote valley known for harboring militant groups. Their base camp was a temporary outpost hidden among rocky cliffs, equipped with surveillance equipment and communication devices. Everything went wrong on the 3rd day. Sarah had been analyzing intercepted communications when the first mortar shell struck their position. The enemy had discovered their location and launched a coordinated attack using superior numbers and heavy weapons. Her team leader, Sergeant Rodriguez, immediately ordered an evacuation. The chaos was overwhelming. Bullets whistled overhead as the team scrambled to destroy sensitive equipment and gather essential supplies. Sarah grabbed her laptop containing crucial intelligence data and followed her teammates toward the evacuation point where helicopters were supposed to extract them. But the enemy had anticipated their escape route. A rocket-propelled grenade struck the lead vehicle, killing 2 soldiers instantly. The remaining team members scattered across the rocky terrain, trying to reach alternative extraction points while under heavy fire. Sarah found herself separated from the others during the firefight. She took cover behind a large boulder as enemy fighters advanced through the valley. Her radio was damaged, and she had no way to contact her team or headquarters. The sound of gunfire gradually faded as her teammates were either captured or forced to retreat further into the mountains. As night fell, Sarah realized the horrible truth. She was completely alone in enemy territory with no backup coming. The extraction helicopters had been called off due to the heavy enemy presence. Her teammates were either dead or captured, and she was presumed missing in action. The young intelligence officer faced an impossible situation. She was surrounded by hostile forces who would torture and kill her if captured. Her training had prepared her for many scenarios, but not for being abandoned behind enemy lines with no hope of rescue. The nearest friendly forces were over 50 miles away across dangerous terrain controlled by the enemy. Sarah spent the first night hiding in a cave, listening to enemy patrols searching for survivors. She had limited ammunition, no food, and only 1 bottle of water. The temperature dropped dramatically after sunset, and she shivered in her thin uniform while planning her next move. During those long hours in darkness, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. Instead of trying to escape through the mountains where enemy forces were actively hunting for her, she would do something completely unexpected. She would infiltrate the enemy base that had attacked her team. The idea seemed insane, but Sarah had studied the enemy's communication patterns for weeks. She knew their routines, their weaknesses, and their command structure. The base was located in a fortified compound about 10 miles from her current position. It housed approximately 40 fighters and served as a regional headquarters for their operations. Her plan was born from desperation, but also from her unique skills as an intelligence analyst. Sarah had grown up in a Hispanic neighborhood where she learned to speak fluent Arabic from her Lebanese neighbors. Her dark hair and olive complexion could help her blend in if she could acquire appropriate clothing and documentation. The next morning, Sarah observed enemy patrol patterns from her hiding place. The fighters moved in predictable groups of 3 or 4, following the same routes through the valley. They were confident in their territory and had become careless after their successful attack on her team. She waited until a small patrol approached her area around midday. Sarah had positioned herself near a narrow passage between 2 rock formations where the enemy would have to pass single file. When the first fighter entered the passage, she struck silently from above, using techniques learned in hand-to-hand combat training. The encounter was swift and brutal. Sarah overpowered the lead fighter and took his weapon and equipment, before the others realized what was happening. She used the captured AK-47 to eliminate the remaining patrol members, ensuring no witnesses could alert the main base to her presence. Among the items she recovered were civilian clothes, identification papers, and a radio tuned to the enemy's communication frequency. Sarah studied the identification documents carefully, noting the names and details she would need to memorize. The papers belonged to a local translator who had been working with the militant group. She spent hours practicing the translator's signature and memorizing key phrases in the local dialect. Sarah's intelligence training had included basic disguise techniques and identity assumption, but she had never expected to use these skills in such a life-or-death situation. As evening approached, Sarah prepared for the most dangerous phase of her plan. She buried her military uniform and equipment, keeping only essential items that could be concealed. The captured clothes fit reasonably well, and she used dirt and ash to darken her skin and change her appearance. The transformation was remarkable. Looking at her reflection in a small mirror taken from one of the fighters, Sarah barely recognized herself. She looked like a local woman who might work as a translator or administrative assistant for the militant group. Her heart pounded as she approached the enemy base under cover of darkness. The compound was surrounded by high walls topped with razor wire, but Sarah had identified weak points in their security during her surveillance missions. She knew the guards' rotation schedules and the locations of their watchtowers. The main entrance was heavily guarded, but there was a service gate on the eastern side that was only checked every 2 hours. Sarah timed her approach perfectly, slipping through the gate during a gap in the patrol schedule. She was now inside the enemy compound with no backup and no way to escape if her cover was blown. The base was larger than it appeared from the outside. Several buildings housed different functions, including barracks, weapons storage, communications center, and command headquarters. Sarah moved carefully between the shadows, avoiding the main pathways where guards might question her presence. Her first objective was to locate the communications center where she could gather intelligence about enemy plans and potentially call for help. Sarah had memorized the compound layout from aerial reconnaissance photos, but seeing it firsthand revealed additional details that could be crucial for her mission. She approached the communication building cautiously, noting the guards' positions and their alertness levels. Most of the fighters seemed relaxed, confident that their territory was secure after the successful attack on her team. This overconfidence would be their weakness. Sarah waited near the building until the guards changed shifts. During the brief moment when the new guards were settling into their positions, she slipped through a side entrance and found herself inside the enemy's nerve center. The room was filled with radio equipment, computers, and maps showing their operational areas. Working quickly, Sarah accessed one of the computers and began downloading intelligence data onto a small flash drive she had concealed in her clothing. The information included enemy troop positions, planned attacks, and communication codes that could save countless lives if delivered to friendly forces. But her infiltration was just beginning. Sarah realized that simply gathering intelligence wasn't enough. She was in a unique position to cause significant damage to the enemy's capabilities from within their own stronghold. The question was whether she had the courage and skills to turn from a hunted fugitive into a deadly threat operating in the heart of enemy territory. The infiltration deepens. Second document. Sarah's hands moved swiftly across the keyboard as she copied critical enemy intelligence onto her flash drive. The communications center was dimly lit, with only the glow of computer screens illuminating her face. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the door, knowing that discovery would mean immediate death. The downloaded files revealed disturbing information about planned attacks on civilian targets and military convoys. The enemy was planning to strike a medical facility that treated wounded soldiers and local civilians. Sarah realized that her intelligence could prevent a massacre, but first she needed to find a way to transmit the information to friendly forces. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the communications center. Sarah quickly pocketed the flash drive and pretended to clean the computer stations, a task that might be expected from someone in her assumed role as a translator and administrative helper. When two fighters entered the room, she kept her head down and continued working. The men spoke in Arabic, discussing patrol schedules and supply deliveries. Sarah listened carefully while appearing to focus on her cleaning duties. One of the fighters mentioned that their commander was expecting an important visitor the following evening, someone who would bring new weapons and funding for their operations. This information was invaluable. Sarah realized that she might have an opportunity to capture or eliminate a high-value target if she could maintain her cover for another day. But staying in the compound meant increasing the risk of exposure with every hour that passed. After the fighters left, Sarah spent several more minutes downloading additional intelligence before carefully erasing her digital footprints. She needed to appear as just another support worker who had been cleaning the facility. Any evidence of unauthorized computer access would trigger a security investigation that would expose her presence. Her next challenge was finding sleeping quarters without raising suspicion. Sarah knew from intercepted communications that the compound housed several female support workers who helped with cooking, cleaning, and administrative tasks. She needed to blend in with this group while planning her next moves. The women's quarters were located in a separate building near the kitchen facilities. Sarah observed the area carefully before approaching, noting the number of women and their daily routines. Most appeared to be local villagers who worked during the day and returned to their families at night, but a few lived permanently on the base. She waited until the evening meal preparation began before entering the women's quarters. The other women were busy with their duties and paid little attention to a new face among them. Sarah introduced herself using the identity from her stolen papers, claiming to be a new translator assigned to the base. The other women accepted her presence without question. In a region where people frequently moved between villages for work or safety reasons, newcomers were not unusual. Sarah helped with meal preparation, using the opportunity to listen to conversations and gather information about the base's daily operations. During dinner, she sat with the support staff and learned about the compound's security procedures, the personalities of key leaders, and the locations of important facilities. The women gossiped about the fighters, their habits, and their weaknesses. This social intelligence proved as valuable as any technical data she could steal from computers. One woman mentioned that the ammunition storage facility was poorly guarded during shift changes. Another complained about how the fighters left sensitive documents scattered around the command center after meetings. Sarah filed away every piece of information, building a mental map of the enemy's vulnerabilities. That night, she slept on a simple mattress in the women's quarters, surrounded by people who would kill her instantly if they knew her true identity. Sarah had to force herself to appear calm while her mind raced with plans for the next phase of her mission. She woke before dawn and volunteered to help with breakfast preparation, using the early morning hours to explore more of the compound. The kitchen was located near the center of the base, providing access to multiple buildings including the command headquarters and weapons storage areas. While carrying food to different locations, Sarah memorized guard positions, identified surveillance cameras, and located emergency exits. She discovered that the base's power supply came from a single generator housed in a vulnerable shed behind the main buildings. Cutting power to the compound would create chaos and darkness that could cover her escape or provide opportunities to strike at key targets. During the morning meal, Sarah overheard commanders discussing the evening's expected visitor. The guest was apparently a regional leader who controlled funding and weapons distribution for multiple terrorist cells. His capture or elimination could significantly disrupt enemy operations across the entire region. The visitor was scheduled to arrive by helicopter at sunset. Security would be increased around the landing zone and command center, but the heightened activity might also provide cover for Sarah's movements if she timed her actions carefully. She spent the afternoon continuing her role as a support worker while conducting detailed reconnaissance of the helicopter landing area. The zone was located on a flat section of ground outside the main compound walls, defended by guard towers and machine gun positions. Any aircraft approaching the area would be carefully monitored and protected. Sarah realized that the landing zone offered both an opportunity and a trap. If she could reach the helicopter when it departed, she might escape the compound with valuable intelligence and possibly a high-value prisoner, but the area would be heavily defended, and failure would result in a firefight she couldn't win alone. As evening approached, Sarah made final preparations for what she knew would be the most dangerous night of her life. She had hidden weapons taken from the eliminated patrol in various locations around the compound. Small amounts of explosive material stolen from the weapons storage area were concealed in the kitchen and generator shed. The other women noticed her nervousness and attributed it to anxiety about meeting important visitors, a reasonable reaction for a new translator. Sarah played along with this assumption while positioning herself to observe the helicopter's arrival from the kitchen building. At sunset, the sound of rotors echoed across the valley. Sarah watched through a small window as a military helicopter descended toward the landing zone. The aircraft was escorted by two smaller attack helicopters that circled the area before departing. Security around the compound increased dramatically as fighters took positions along the walls and in the guard towers. The visitor who emerged from the helicopter was a tall man in expensive clothes, accompanied by two bodyguards carrying advanced weapons. Sarah recognized him from intelligence photos as Ahmed Hassan, a key figure in the regional terrorist network. His capture would be a major victory for coalition forces. Hassan and his escorts were met by the base commander and escorted toward the main building for what Sarah assumed would be an important planning meeting. This was her opportunity to get close to the leadership and gather intelligence about their future operations. She volunteered to serve refreshments at the meeting, a task that the other women were happy to avoid since it meant potential exposure to dangerous men. Sarah prepared a tray of tea and snacks while concealing a small recording device and a dose of fast-acting sedative in her clothing. The meeting was held in the base commander's office, a large room with maps covering the walls and a conference table surrounded by chairs. Sarah entered quietly and began serving refreshments, while the men discussed plans for coordinated attacks on government facilities and international aid workers. The conversation revealed details about sleeper cells in major cities, planned suicide bombings, and shipments of advanced weapons crossing the border. Sarah memorized every detail while appearing to focus solely on her serving duties. The men barely acknowledged her presence, treating her as invisible furniture rather than a potential threat. When she had gathered enough intelligence, Sarah excused herself and returned to the kitchen. But instead of ending her infiltration, she began preparing for the most audacious phase of her plan. Rather than simply escaping with intelligence, she would attempt to neutralize the terrorist leadership and destroy the base's operational capabilities. The compound held approximately 40 fighters, multiple weapons caches, communication equipment, and now a high-value target whose elimination could save countless innocent lives. Sarah was one person against overwhelming odds, but her position inside the enemy stronghold gave her advantages that no external assault force could match. She began moving through the compound in darkness, placing explosive charges at critical locations including the power generator, ammunition storage, and communication center. Each placement required careful timing to avoid patrols and security cameras. The charges were small but strategically positioned to cause maximum damage to the base's infrastructure. Sarah's final objective was the command building, where Hassan and the other leaders continued their planning meeting. She had saved enough explosive material for one large charge that could eliminate the terrorist leadership in a single strike. but reaching the building would require passing through the most heavily guarded section of the compound. As she approached the command center, Sarah knew that her next actions would determine whether she became a hero who struck a decisive blow against terrorism or another casualty of a war fought in the shadows of remote mountains. The choice was no longer between escape and capture, but between making her infiltration count for something greater than her own survival. Neutralizing all threats, third document. Sarah crouched in the shadows outside the command building, watching the guards pace back and forth near the entrance. Inside, she could hear the muffled voices of terrorist leaders planning attacks that would kill innocent people. Her heart pounded as she checked the timer on her concealed explosive device one final time. The plan she had developed was audacious and extremely dangerous. She would create a diversion by detonating the charges placed around the compound's infrastructure, then use the resulting chaos to infiltrate the command meeting and neutralize the leadership. Success would require perfect timing and more than a little luck. At exactly midnight, Sarah triggered the first explosive charge at the power generator. The blast echoed across the compound as all electrical lights went out, plunging the base into darkness. Emergency generators kicked in moments later, but the confusion gave Sarah precious seconds to move closer to her target. Shouts erupted from guard towers as fighters tried to determine what had happened. Some thought they were under attack by external forces, while others suspected sabotage from within. Sarah used their confusion to slip past the outer perimeter of guards around the command building. The second explosion destroyed the communication center, cutting the base's contact with the outside world and preventing them from calling for reinforcements. Radio static filled the air as operators frantically tried to re-establish contact with their headquarters and patrol units. Sarah reached the back wall of the command building just as the third charge detonated at the weapons storage facility. The massive explosion sent debris flying across the compound and triggered secondary explosions as ammunition cooked off in the intense heat. The blast was so powerful that windows shattered throughout the base. Panic spread through the compound as fighters realized they were under a coordinated attack. Guards abandoned their posts to help fight fires and search for survivors near the destroyed buildings. The careful security around the command center collapsed as men rushed to deal with multiple emergencies. Inside the building, Sarah could hear Hassan and the other leaders shouting orders and demanding explanations. They assumed the attack was coming from coalition forces using aerial bombardment or special operations teams. None of them suspected that a single infiltrator was responsible for the devastation. Sarah slipped through a damaged window into a storage room adjacent to the main conference area. Through the thin wall, she could clearly hear the terrorist leaders arguing about their response to the attack. Hassan was demanding immediate evacuation, while the base commander insisted on organizing a defense. She carefully placed her final explosive charge against the wall, separating her from the conference room. The device was larger than the others and contained enough explosive material to bring down a significant portion of the building. But Sarah realized that simply killing the terrorist leaders might not be enough to complete her mission. The intelligence she had gathered revealed details about numerous planned attacks and terrorist cells operating throughout the region. That information needed to reach coalition forces to prevent future massacres. Simply eliminating Hassan and his associates would disrupt their operations temporarily, but others would eventually take their place. Sarah made a split-second decision that changed her entire plan. Instead of detonating the charge immediately, she would attempt to capture Hassan alive and extract him along with the intelligence data. A living high-value prisoner would provide far more information than a dead terrorist leader. She modified the explosive device to create a smaller, non-lethal blast that would stun the occupants of the conference room without killing them. The explosion would give her a brief window to enter the room and take control of the situation before the terrorists could recover. Sarah triggered the charge and immediately burst through the damaged wall into the conference room. The blast had knocked Hassan and 3 other leaders to the floor, leaving them dazed but conscious. She quickly secured their weapons and bound their hands using zip ties from her equipment. Hassan looked up at her in confusion, speaking in Arabic and demanding to know who she was. Sarah responded in his own language, identifying herself as an American intelligence officer and informing him that he was now her prisoner. The shock of hearing perfect Arabic from someone they had assumed was a local support worker left the terrorists speechless. The other men in the room began to recover from the explosion's effects, but Sarah had positioned herself strategically to control all entrances and exits. She held an automatic weapon taken from one of Hassan's bodyguards and made it clear that any resistance would be met with lethal force. Outside the building, the compound was in complete chaos. Fires burned throughout the base as fighters tried to organize some kind of defensive response. The ammunition storage continued to explode sporadically, sending more debris flying through the air. Most of the base's communication equipment had been destroyed, leaving the defenders unable to coordinate their actions. Sarah used her radio to contact coalition forces on an emergency frequency, transmitting her location and requesting immediate extraction. The response came within minutes, as helicopters that had been monitoring the area for signs of her survival changed course toward the compound. But she still needed to get Hassan and herself out of the building and to a location where the helicopters could safely land. The compound's defenses were in disarray, but there were still dozens of armed fighters between her position and potential extraction points. Sarah forced Hassan to walk in front of her as they moved through the damaged building toward a rear exit. She had studied the compound's layout carefully during her infiltration and knew about a service road that led to an open area suitable for helicopter landings. The route would take them past several defensive positions, but the ongoing fires and explosions provided cover for their movement. As they emerged from the building, Sarah could see fighters running between the various disaster sites, trying to save equipment and treat wounded personnel. The scene was chaotic enough that 2 figures moving through the shadows might escape notice, especially with everyone focused on the immediate emergencies. They had covered about half the distance to the extraction point when a guard spotted them and raised an alarm. Sarah was forced to eliminate the guard quickly before he could alert others. But the gunfire drew attention from nearby fighters. She found herself in a running firefight while trying to protect her prisoner and reach the landing zone. Hassan initially tried to escape during the confusion, but Sarah made it clear that she would shoot him if he attempted to flee. The terrorist leader quickly realized that his best chance of survival lay in cooperating with his captor until an opportunity for escape presented itself. The sound of approaching helicopters became audible over the noise of explosions and gunfire. Sarah could see the aircraft's lights in the distance as they approached the compound at high speed, but she also noticed that more enemy fighters were converging on her position as word spread about a prisoner being moved toward the perimeter. The final 100 yards to the landing zone became a desperate sprint under heavy fire. Sarah used smoke grenades to obscure their movement while calling in covering fire from the approaching helicopters. The aircraft's door gunners engaged enemy positions around the landing zone, suppressing the defenders long enough for Sarah and her prisoner to reach the extraction point. As the helicopter touched down, Sarah pushed Hassan aboard and climbed in after him. The aircraft immediately lifted off as enemy fighters emerged from the smoke and opened fire at the departing aircraft. Bullets struck the helicopter's armor plating, but the crew chief reported no critical damage as they gained altitude and headed toward friendly territory. During the flight to safety, Sarah quickly briefed the helicopter crew on the intelligence she had gathered and the significance of her prisoner. Hassan remained silent during the journey, apparently calculating his options as he realized that his capture would severely damage terrorist operations throughout the region. The helicopter landed at a coalition base where intelligence specialists and interrogation experts were waiting to process both Sarah's information and her high-value prisoner. Medical personnel checked her for injuries while debriefing officers began the process of extracting every detail from her incredible infiltration mission. In the days that followed, the intelligence Sarah had gathered led to the disruption of multiple planned terrorist attacks and the capture of numerous sleeper cell operatives. Hassan's interrogation revealed the locations of weapons caches, funding sources, and communication networks that had previously been unknown to coalition forces. The destroyed terrorist base was never rebuilt. Aerial reconnaissance showed that the explosions Sarah had triggered had eliminated most of the compound's infrastructure and forced the surviving fighters to abandon the strategic location. The loss of their regional headquarters significantly disrupted terrorist operations across the entire border area. Sarah's actions had transformed a mission failure and apparent death sentence into one of the most successful counterterrorism operations of the conflict. Her ability to turn the tables on her enemies and strike back from within their own stronghold had eliminated a major terrorist threat while gathering intelligence that would save countless innocent lives. The official reports described her infiltration as a textbook example of improvised special operations conducted under impossible circumstances. Sarah had demonstrated that sometimes the most effective response to being abandoned behind enemy lines was not escape, but rather turning the situation into an opportunity to strike a decisive blow against the enemy from where they least expected it. Her story became a classified legend within intelligence circles, studied by future officers who might one day find themselves in similarly desperate situations. Sarah had proven that with courage, training, and determination, even a single operative could turn apparent defeat into extraordinary victory against overwhelming odds.